So what will we be doing today? You will learn what really determines your success in business and life, excuse me, and it's not necessarily what you think it is. I will also guide you towards 3 practical things that you can do to improve in this area. So stay tuned for practical tips. So here we go. What really drives your success in life and business? It may surprise you. Imagine a farmer with a sack of high quality seeds. So each seed represents maybe a skill, like coding, like accounting, like management, like design. All of these skills are valuable. These are just examples. But say each seed represents a skill needed for a particular high-paying job. Now, of course, all the seeds are valuable. But what happens next is the farmer scatters these seeds across 2 different fields. So in the first field, the soil is rich, is well nourished, and what happens then is every single seed takes root. And the plants grow strong, they grow tall, the plants are resilient against weather changes. And so this is what happens when a candidate for a job or when somebody in business has a good amount of emotional resilience. Emotional resilience will support their skills. And so everything that recruiters may look for or that customers in business may look for will flourish quite naturally, built around these seeds. But in the second field, the soil is depleted. So the same seeds are planted, but these seeds will struggle. Some will sprout, will quickly wither, others never even germinate. So the farmer can blame the seed, but in truth, it is the soil and the quality of the soil that decides the end result of the harvest. So that's what will really drive your level of success in business and life, whether you're aware of it or not. 85%, and that's 85% of your overall success in business and life will be down to your emotional capacity or your emotional resilience. Your emotional resilience decides your identity based on how you feel about yourself and based on your inner self-talk. And if you have much chronic stress in your system, emotional resilience is going to be diminished. So let's look at some of the ways in which emotional resilience can affect your performance and work and business. Here are 5 of the biggest concerns that arise around the workplace as listed by the American Psychiatric Organization. Number 1, overthinking and perfectionism. So overthinking and perfectionism can make your work difficult, as you can imagine, when, for example, you're very preoccupied, your attention isn't fully on the job, when with the perfectionism you can't deliver on a project because you keep reworking it. Number 2 on the list is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is where you have continuous self-doubt, you're second guessing everything, you have a difficulty as a result making decisions, you have a difficulty completing projects, and you will also probably be reluctant to take the next step in your career. You're getting kind of stuck. Number 3, fear of feedback or reacting strongly emotionally to criticism and setbacks, and probably putting the blame externally on someone or something rather than seeing or rather than sort of checking what you can improve on. So you can see how fear of feedback and reacting strongly and emotionally can get you stuck in when you, for example, when you're in an organization, feedback will be built into the system. You have regular review meetings with your manager, well, and you have to listen to their feedback. And of course, you can filter it. Not everything in there may be 100% useful for you, but you're going to have to take a certain amount of that feedback on board so that you can deliver what the organization requires you to deliver. And if you don't, then of course that's going to ultimately impede your career. Number 4 on the list, listed by the American Psychiatric Organization, people-pleasing or over-accommodating, perhaps to avoid conflict, perhaps to avoid rejection. And so this people-pleasing means really unclear boundaries. A no isn't necessarily a no, a yes isn't necessarily a yes, or rather, no will be really hard for these people to say at all. Most likely they will say yes and will actually mean no. And so they're very prone to becoming overburdened and becoming very stressed and perhaps burnt out, in which case that will cause absenteeism in the workplace. And that's not beneficial for any organization. It will cause the organization difficulties and it may stall your career as well. Number 5 on the list is chronic stress and burnout. And of course, work environments these days, whether you're out on your own or whether you're working for an organization, there are a lot of demands these days. And the more chronic stress you have in your system already, the more easily you're driven towards burnout. And then that if that results in sick leave and so on, that's very difficult for organizations to deal with. And if you're in business on your own, it may very well close you down. So yes, it doesn't matter if you're in employment or if you're working for yourself. These issues will crop up in any context and will make your professional life more difficult than it should be. So the story that I told you about the field or the 2 fields rather, and the farmer sowing seeds in 2 different fields, that story makes clear that your skills are only one thing in the overall equation. They're only one element in the overall equation. They're like the seeds in the bag, but the seeds alone don't guarantee growth. There's a whole environment around them. And what really determines whether those seeds turn into anything worthwhile in the end is the soil. And in professional life, that soil is your emotional resilience. So think about this, what recruiters are actually looking for. I think that's a really good measuring stick. How recruiters are thinking about these things. Before they hire someone, what do they consider? So yes, they consider the seeds in the bag. They consider your certifications, training, responsibilities that you've had. But they don't necessarily stop there. So other things recruiters will look for are your cultural fit into the organization, your adaptability, your problem-solving skills, and oftentimes they have tests for those things these days. So either they will be cognitive tests or they will be group interviews where they give you problem-solving tasks. All of those things have become a lot more common. Same about communication skills. They may very well test you for those even during the interview. What also matters is your initiative, your motivation, how you show up in teamwork, your professionalism, your work ethic, and other things like that. And so you can see, when you look at this list closely and really look and really examine it, Skills and experience stand out because they are the only factor that isn't directly linked into emotional resilience. All of the other criteria on the list are actually linked to emotional resilience. And one could say they're an output almost of your level of emotional resilience. Because if your resilience is diminished in any way, you will be less adaptable, problem solving may become more difficult, your communication may very well be impacted, your initiative and motivation, because likely you're going to look externally for a fix rather than internally, and that may impact how you show up in all of these areas. And so this is where I want you to pause for a moment and really reflect. And I'm going to run some scenarios past you here for that purpose. Have you ever wondered? And drop a yes into the comments. Drop a yes into the comments if you agree that these things that I'm going to read out to you can be linked to your level of emotional resilience, right? So here we go. Have you ever wondered about a situation where two equally skilled people perform differently under pressure? Can this be related to emotional resilience? Or is it likely to be related to emotional resilience or not? Drop a yes in the comments if you agree, and maybe drop a no if you don't agree. And question number 2, have you ever wondered why some colleagues bounce back quickly from setbacks while other people maybe end up on sick leave with burnout? Have you ever wondered why some colleagues bounce back quickly from setbacks while others may end up on sick leave with burnout? Drop a yes in the comments if you agree that this is related to emotional resilience levels. And number 3, drop a yes in the comments if you agree the following is related to levels of emotional resilience. When people with impressive CVs sometimes stall in their careers, and we can't figure out why. When people with impressive CVs sometimes falter or stall in their careers, and there are no obvious answers as to why. Can that be related to emotional resilience? Or question number 4, have you ever wondered how come the person who is most experienced in a particular subject matter in your workplace on a team doesn't become the leader of that team? Could that be related to emotional resilience? Drop a yes in the comments if you agree. Or why someone with fewer qualifications than you got ahead of you career-wise. Could that be related to emotional resilience, yes or no? And the final question, when someone who seems less experienced is trusted with bigger responsibilities, could that be their level of emotional resilience that makes them seem more trustworthy? Now, some of these things, especially the last few questions, you can put them down to workplace politics, and you can use that as an explanation as to why other people got ahead instead of you. But could it also be the case that sometimes, perhaps, the person who wins might have better emotional resilience than you? So I'll leave you with these reflection questions. And it's issues like, now I need to check, have I told you this, what the American Psychiatric Association says? I think we've talked about it. Think about this, just to remind you of their 5 biggest concerns around emotional resilience in the workplace. So if you have any of these issues like overthinking, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, fear of feedback, or reacting strongly to criticism or setbacks, people pleasing, over accommodating, chronic stress, and burnout. If you identify with any of these issues in your career, just maybe it's that very issue that, without even being flagged in an obvious way, just maybe putting obstacles in your way as to why your career isn't progressing in the way that it should. And so this is where I move on to give you some research-backed resilience practices that you can work with. And in particular, I'm going to give you 3 really good tips here today that are highlighted by research, that are really very, very effective at improving your emotional resilience. So resilience, emotional resilience, isn't a trait that some people have and other people don't. It's something that can be built. There's a lot of evidence around what works here, but also you need to understand that emotional resilience is shaped by your experiences in the past. Emotional resilience is shaped by how much chronic stress is in your system. And very, very often, this chronic stress starts accumulating, starts piling up from when you're very young. And so if you've had maybe they're not even that obvious, the difficult experience in childhood, for many of my clients, they would be. So they could have grown up in an alcoholic family and maybe learned there, just one example, that they need to put the needs of other people before their own. So then they become very accommodating, which is commonly called people pleasing. I'm not so comfortable with that word because it infers some judgment, really. But you can see how it's the past that shapes these 5 criteria flagged by the American Psychiatric Organization. And so if you carry much chronic stress around with you, you can use these 3 skills I'm going to give you to start building resilience. But what's also very, very important is to deal with all that material from the past and to clear it out of your system. But more about that in a little while. But let's look at the 3 research-backed tips that I want to give you today. Number 1 is a skill that I teach all of my clients, and that is mindful observation. It's a really powerful tool that I use myself and have been using for many, many years. Now, the word mindfulness is bandied around quite freely these days. Mindful observation is a very, very particular skill. It's something that really you start to, when you use it, you start to build it into your life. It doesn't take any extra time, but it sort of becomes almost like a lifestyle. Because what you're going to do is you're going to imagine that there's a little observer creature sitting on your shoulder, and this observer is with you as you go through your everyday. So you're not consumed by any one thing you're experiencing, because you're also observing yourself in the midst of it. And this observer doesn't judge. This observer feeds back useful information to you. And so when you do that all day long, you have one foot in your daily experience and you have another foot outside of your daily experience. And you're constantly kind of looking at yourself, you're being curious, you're wondering about how come that I think this way, feel this way, make these decisions, do things in a particular way. And it gives you it gives you a sort of bird's eye perspective on everything, and it gives you a lot more choices then, because you can examine those things and you can then make changes really in the system when you have all this information. What's very useful is to note these observations down, start a notebook on these observations, and just start being curious, because we run on autopilot so much, especially when we're busy. When you observe yourself, you can step out of that autopilot and you can begin to spot patterns that are running subconsciously that you don't even know about, perhaps, that you're not even familiar with, that you've just sort of taken for granted. And once you get to know these automated, subconsciously driven patterns, you can then decide which of them you're going to let go, which of them are fine, and which of them are actually maybe interfering with some of the things you want to achieve in your life, or which are perhaps undermining your relationships. Number 2 skill that I want to give you today is journaling. So let's talk about that. So you note down your observations, and that gives you the opportunity also to apply some reflection skills that come from CBT, from cognitive behavioral therapy. You can analyze your thinking a little bit and use your notebook as a stage to do that in. So, for example, take someone who overthinks a lot and feels anxious because they're always worried about what other people think. So in their journal, they may write, for an observation, I keep going over yesterday's team meeting over and over in my head. I'm worried what other people think of me. I think they may see me as incompetent. And when you use some cognitive behavioral skills, in this case, reframing, then you can ask yourself, well, what evidence is there actually for that? What evidence is there for this claim that other people see me as incompetent? And does it really warrant me worrying about this? And there may be no concrete evidence at all. This assumption or this fear that other people talk about you or think negatively of you might to a large extent be driven by your internalized feelings, your internalized belief systems. And in actual reality, we never have control over what other people think. So when you're reframing your belief and your response to that situation, that's what this person may write in their notebook. Actually, in reality, I never have control over what other people think. The only control that I have in this life is how much energy and time I waste obsessing about what other people think of me. And in reality, this obsessing doesn't change anything. What it really does is it drains me. And so when you go through a reframe process like that, that's not a fluffy outcome or positive thinking. What you're doing is you're using your rational thinking brain to steer yourself in a different direction. And over time, if you practice this frequently, you can change your perspective and you can weaken the grip of these automated programs running in your subconscious that are driving anxious overthinking. Number 3 of the skills I want to teach you here is emotional regulation. And emotional regulation is super, super powerful. There are 2 different ways to do emotional regulation. The most common way that's being taught is what's called top-down regulation, or that's what I call it. And top-down means you're using the top of the system, the prefrontal cortex, your abstract thinking, your rational thinking brain, to regulate your emotions. So using that part of your brain, when we go with the same example of the anxious overthinker, when anxious feelings arise, they can remind themselves, well, there is no actual cause right now for why I'm feeling anxious. The most likely conclusion is that what I'm experiencing right now isn't quite real. It's not related to the present moment. So most likely this will be some old programming, something from my past here that's coming up, and it's just sort of playing out, and I don't need to respond to it. So at the same time, then they can allow that churning stomach or maybe a tense neck that they notice, and they can just let that be there alongside this anxious thinking for a minute and not attach to it. That's the important part in top-down regulation, is that it enables you to detach from your current experience. So this person can then carry on with their day, and they can still observe the body sensations like the churning stomach and the tense neck. They can still observe what they interpret as an anxious emotion on a feeling, on a physical feeling level. And this way they can build tolerance over time. So they're teaching themselves to be with the discomfort and to still function. Now that's really powerful when you can do it, and this would be top-down emotional regulation as its best, exactly as it's designed to work. However, there are limits around top-down regulation. The thing is that your emotions have a way of dominating, especially when you're looking at strong emotions that have a lot of physical feelings coming with them. So to stay with this anxious overthinking example, the churning stomach may be a very disturbing experience for someone. And biologically, emotions combined with physical feelings are part of a communication system that's survival driven, so that we can act really, really quickly should we be under threat in some way. And so that's why emotions can be experienced so much stronger than rational thought, because they were designed in that way. They were actually designed to override your thinking. And when there's a head-to-head contest between emotions and ideas and thoughts, guess what will win? Most likely it's the emotion that will win. And that's why people will often say, I know this logically, but I'm still feeling these feelings. And so that's why I personally work much more with bottom-up regulation. It's not to say that top-down regulation isn't a useful skill. It is, but in practice there are limitations around it. So bottom-up regulation, is instead of trying to talk the emotional brain down, what we're doing is we're working directly with the senses and with the body, and we're using the senses to calm the emotional response. So research shows that this is very, very effective, and it's very effective because it goes straight to the source. So with bottom-up regulation, we can work very directly with the limbic system in the brain, which is where emotions are generated. And so we can make it stop. We can make disturbing feelings stop. Of course, not immediately. We reduce them in intensity, and after a while, when we've cleared enough material, then they can stop. So when you weigh up top down and bottom up regulation, a good metaphor for that is the 80-20 rule in business. So, you know, this rule where they say that 20% of your actions drive 80% of your success in business. Well, if you compare that to bottom up regulation versus top down regulation, bottom up regulation is your 20%, where 20% of your actions will determine 80% of your overall result. And that's why I use bottom up regulation all the time. And my work is very much driven by it. We're addressing emotions at the root cause level. We're not just trying to reason them away or to argue with them. So here's a story that links into this emotional regulation piece. And this is a story of someone I worked with, Maggie. Let's call her Maggie. She is a senior project manager in tech, very sharp person, highly organized, very, very driven. So from the outside, Maggie is the definition of competence. Inside, she's actually really exhausted. In terms of her background, Maggie grew up with a highly critical father. He praised her achievements sometimes, but for the most part, he picked everything else apart. And the emotional code that she absorbed was really simple but very harsh. If I make a mistake, bam, all the approval is gone. So I have to stay on alert all the time. It's not okay for me to relax. I cannot really be myself. I can't show any weakness here. And this early programming has stayed with her well into adult life, well into her career. So Maggie used to double check everything. She would over prepare for every meeting, a true perfectionist. She would rewrite her emails a number of times before sending them. And while she knew that she was a very capable person, she did not feel capable. The stress of trying to prove herself all the time really drained her. And so when we worked together one-on-one, our focus was not on talk or on positive thinking or changing the way she was thinking. What we did is we used bottom-up emotional regulation, the kind that can down-regulate the emotional stress responses very quickly, and that can also go to the source and can undo the programming behind it. So the sources of her chronic stress, growing up with a critical father, what we did is we repaired the faulty childhood programming, as I call it, that was caused directly by that, and we repaired that in the places that still ran her adult decisions. And that's how in only 5 sessions we were able to completely downregulate Maggie's stress responses and her faulty programming, and we undid the emotional code that had kept her stuck in a place of chronic stress. And interestingly, what happened then, and this is what happens in my work all the time when I use bottom-up regulation, by the end of our work together, Maggie was also thinking differently. So it seems that your thinking is driven by your emotions, or certainly colored by them. She felt very differently about herself, but her sense of identity also changed. She had a much more realistic, much more embodied sense of herself as a capable professional. So she then started, for example, to look around in her organization and have a little look around as to how other people were operating. And her conclusion was she was actually one of the top highest performers in her company. So she began to let go of the demand to be perfect all the time with every task. Instead, she started really liking and appreciating herself and loosening up a little bit. She could now show up at work with confidence and, sort of sometimes, I don't want to say that her performance levels dropped, but she basically became more humane with herself and she realized that she didn't have to constantly over deliver. And this really benefited her physical health, and it also made her much calmer, much more self assured, much happier in herself. Her relationships benefited hugely as well. So you might ask yourself, what exactly is bottom up emotional regulation, and is this something I can learn? And yes, you can, because the very same bottom up emotional regulation skills that I use to help Maggie are exactly what I teach on my emotional reset challenge when I run it. So, on the emotional reset challenge, you can learn and practice real world bottom up regulation skills that bring, for example, anxiety down quickly and that can really boost your resilience. So, if this speaks to you, then look out for the next date. It's the best way to experience these methods for yourself. Book in these 5 evenings for yourself, go through the process with me, and walk away with really handy skills you can incorporate into your life. So this more or less is us for today. I've given you 3 hands-on strategies that will work for you. They are research-based. They will help you build emotional resilience and thereby improve your positioning in the world of business and work, so that you can up your game in the areas where most professionals don't even look. Most professionals still think that their performance levels are driven mostly by the skills and experience that they acquire throughout their careers, and emotional regulation tends to still be a blind spot. So be ahead of the curve, give yourself that advantage. And if you identify with the 5 things that the American Psychiatric Organization highlight: overthinking and perfectionism, imposter syndrome, fear of feedback or reacting strongly to feedback, people pleasing, over accommodating, chronic stress and burnout, I really, really encourage you to look after these, liberate yourself from these. It will really make a difference to your career. My personal story shows that as well. That's been exactly my experience and how I've been able to make massive changes in my work life in the last 5 years. So thank you for watching.